Welcome to Music Ed Tech Talk, a podcast exploring the topics of music, education, technology, and the intersections between them, with a special focus on the productive and creative process. I'm your host, Robby Burns. All right. What were we talking about a second ago? Something about microphone setup.
I got lost in the clap.
You got lost in the clap. Oh, we were talking about voice and speed of audio.
Yeah, I know. Right, because my voice I generally talk really quickly and unintelligibly and in the low point of my voice. So having a little bit higher voice and slowing down is probably better. Yeah,
and I was going to say, I usually speed it up just because I tend to think of myself like I'm a 1.25 podcast listener. And so I already do something like where I strip the silences and then like squish together the gaps of the audio recording. But every now and then, if like both sides of the conversation are kind of slugging, I'll like apply a little bit of speed increase, just a little bit. You know, make the show
sense.
A minute shorter. You know, those precious minutes count. Some people don't just like listen to the podcast. Like some people don't do what I do, which is they have it just constantly as their background of all things where their mind is idle and their hands are busy. They like to have compact commute length episodes that they like listen to on a schedule. So I respect that. That's not really my style, but that's something that I consider.
Except people aren't commuting anymore.
Right. And podcast listening, I have read, has not gone down as much as I thought it would. Down a little bit, but it's like the same on the weekends, but like just down a little tiny bit during the weekdays. I don't know. I have found that I'm doing, at first I wasn't listening at all, but now I'm like finding places to squeeze it in my life that I didn't before, like doing the dishes or like, you know, other odds and things around the house. I'm up to date.
Good. I have not listened to too many podcasts. I get constant distraction around my house.
But are you listening to that many podcasts to begin with?
Not too often. I would sometimes listen on the ride back and forth to school, but that was about it. Sometimes on a run, if I get prepared enough to actually download something onto a phone or get something ready to go.
Well, all of them do the connection to the watch now, so you don't even need to download it in advance. You just beam it straight to your watch.
That's good. One of these days, I'll get my watch to actually work when I'm running, other than just taking my metrics. I have no luck with audio.
Bummer. Yeah,
we'll get there.
Well, I guess so. Speaking of driving to work and that we haven't been doing it, I guess now is as good as any time to introduce Ben Denne back to the show, my colleague who I usually sit next to every day. We'll return to that again someday.
I really hope so. This is not the same.
No, it is not. I think we've both respectively spent most of our mornings editing virtual band and orchestra videos, respectively.
Yeah, this is going to be, I guess, CPD credit work. I've learned how to use video editing software and getting faster at it. It's not an easy project, but I think if we continue this in the fall, I'm going to do quartets and quintets and nothing with large ensembles because I don't have a computer strong enough to keep up with 40 tracks going at the same time.
I think that there are some benefits, though, to that I can imagine.
Yeah, there's a lot more accountability when you have a quartet or a quintet as well.
Right, that's the one thing that I haven't really been able to get with the virtual band recording is the accountability. And part of it is how our district is set up to grade, which is that we aren't right now.
Right.
And, you know, some middle school kids respond to the numerical score associated with their performance.
And some people have figured out that they don't have to do anything for the rest of the year, and we haven't seen them in a couple weeks.
Right. And then there are some who tried to turn in all of the work from the fourth quarter on Friday, right before close of business.
Percussionist, right?
Yeah. That is right.
Sorry. That was a big setup. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
It was a good setup. I walked right into it, actually. Well, and then percussionist, you know, I mean, we're doing what we can to play on practice pads and small bell sets.
Yeah.
I have to play the crash cymbals and the concert snare and the bass. Actually, someone has been doing the bass drum parts in GarageBand. He's like, "Can I just play the bass drum instrument in GarageBand?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think I can like warm it up a little bit and make it blend like a concert bass drum." So in our video, one of the many videos is not a screen grab of a kid's face with an instrument. It's just a screen recording of the GarageBand drum set going boom, 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 boom.
I guess you got it right. You can set the tempo in the right spot and just let it go.
Yeah. Well, so I've been actually dragging a reference recording, the same reference recording that I have them record along to, into the video and audio project. I mean, since we're talking about this, we might as well. It's probably useful for some people who are listening. We're both using Final Cut Pro to edit our videos, and then we are exporting the video as an XML file, which is in the file menu, to Logic, so where you can get some finer controls. And we were just, this might be interesting subject matter for just a minute here. Like, we were talking earlier this morning about like kind of some of the, like, what are the things that you are and are not doing in Logic, because you can go pretty far. Like, I can literally map out every note of a clarinet performance onto a piano roll and drag the notes. You know, I can raise an individual note 2 cents, or drag it to a different pitch, or inch it a split second earlier. You can go wild.
Yeah, you can do a lot of things. I'm trying to limit how much I'm doing. For one, for time's sake, and two, for authenticity. This is still a middle school performance, and you can't just create all the corrections you want in the process of editing and still call it a middle school performance. It'd be great if they could play perfectly in tune, but they're not playing perfectly in tune. It'd be great if they're playing perfectly in time. And there's some things you can do. The kids that miscount rest or something, or come in at the wrong time, I'll shift that over a little bit, or make sure it doesn't sound atrocious. It gets close. But I don't want to spend a ton of time. But yeah, the idea of just taking this and dumping it into Logic and having the background track and just taking track by track and lining it up as best you can with the background track has been working well. I've also been, they have a chance, you can assign audio roles to different tracks inside Final Cut. And so I learned how to make custom audio roles. And so I've named them Violin 1, Violin 2, Viola, Cello, and Bass. And as I'm putting the video clips in, I'm assigning those to different audio roles based on the instrument part that they're playing. And then when I go into Logic, they are all grouped in that as such. So I can mute all the other instruments and just look at the cello section and try to make sure that the balance is right in the cello section. And then do the same thing for violas and basses and violins. And then at the end, I have one bar for each section, and then all I have to do is adjust the balance within that section so that the 5 sections are balanced, and it seems to get a fairly good result without a ton of work.
Once you design those roles, are you able to reuse them in different video events and projects in Final Cut?
No, you have to create them every time you do a project, but it takes all 5 seconds to click the plus button and write violin.
Must be nice having just that many instrument groupings.
Yes. Well, the thing about band stuff is you don't have any more than 4 or 5 things going on at the same time, but the instrumentation, the groupings of how those instruments are put together changes as you go through the piece.
So roles, yeah. Roles would be an interesting way of solving the problem. I have just set up the groups in Logic, not in Final Cut, and it's not a role feature. It's the group. It's literally like where you say you select like 6 tracks and you create a group out of them. So when you move the volume of one, the volume of all moves.
Right.
And that's kind of cool though, because then you can get things like I can have low brass, flutes. I can have it by section, but then I can also have one that's low instruments. So I can within just the low instruments kind of get a blend between the bassoon and the tuba, and then move that grouping all as one as well. So you can have things belong to more than one group, which is neat.
Right. We're just trying to mimic how kids would do this if they were listening in an ensemble. They would listen to their section and see if they could get them sounding good within that section, and then they balance the sections. So sort of mimicking, I guess, good musicianship.
Yeah, I mean, only it's me who's doing it, not them, which is probably, I mean, the idea of developing a balance and a blend concept is probably, it's one of the things that I emphasize the most in a rehearsal, and it's one of the things that's nearly impossible to teach virtually.
True, because they can't do anything cohesively.
You can kind of work it from the angle of, okay, the reference recording I've provided you is something that I want you to blend in to, but even then, I don't know that a lot of them have an environment where they can turn it up loud enough to where they really hear it as bigger than themselves, so it's becoming more just about rhythmic alignment than anything else.
Yeah, but headphones seem to work fairly well for the kids who are using them.
Well, then you can like feel the vibration too, right? Like that's an added element to like have it just like right up on your ears and jaw that I don't think is there when you're in a band rehearsal.
True.
Yeah. Well, the video ending never ends, it seems.
Oh, it's got to end this week. I've got to get it done.
Yeah, me too. I'm actually making a video about the video also, so I've made it more complicated for myself because it's like I've got this whole kind of organized, like this whole document where it's like, okay, I think it would be useful for people if they saw at least like what are the apps that I'm using and what's the general order of how I do it. But so it's like complicated. And then of course my computer's fan is going nuts because I've got Logic and Final Cut and Screenflow all open at the same time and fighting over like which one's getting command of which audio ins and outs of my computer.
Right, but that's also a serious topic. Is both you and I are running pretty high level MacBook Pros, and the computers are struggling to get through this problem, this process. So obviously you can't just get a huge Mac Pro, huge desktop multiprocessor machine just to handle your video editing because that's a lot of money just for a teaching job. But also there's a lot of teachers out there that don't have these kind of computers at their disposal and are trying to either do it like LumaFusion on an iPad or trying to work on one of the school issued laptops, which won't get you very far at all.
Right. Yeah. I think even like you said, what we have is even pretty out there. And even though my computer is a 2016 MacBook, it's so much more powerful than what most of our colleagues are working with. I mean, and then of course the added problem of, the hot thing that I think a lot of music teachers are coming onto right now is getting Apple's Pro apps, Final Cut and Logic, because they've got the 90-day discount and you can get the educator discount where you get all 5 Pro apps for $200. All of that's great, but like I know in our district, most teachers can't even do this unless they log into their school computer with their own Apple ID, which that's a line I think people don't want to cross. And then, of course, will the computer even, like we have ancient MacBook Airs in our district, so will the MacBook Air even run to, more than 3 or 4 videos simultaneously? Can get my band project that has the most has about maybe 50 audio and video files. I'd say like 10 to 12 of them are audio only. So that's pretty good. I mean, for a 4-year-old computer.
Yeah. The one I'm working on right now probably is going to have close to 100 video files in there by the time it's done. And it gets laggy really quickly.
So you're doing something that combines more than one of your ensembles?
No, well, this is each module we assigned every week of assignments. I had given the students 8 to 16 bars to work at. So the first module had the first 8 measures, and the second one has the next 8 measures. And so each one of those has about 20 to 30 videos. So this piece is divided into 6 sections. It's going to probably have close to 180 or 200 videos by the time it's done with it, even though there's only 20 or 30 students playing at the same time.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think is more taxing on the computer is, how many videos do you have that it's processing all at the same time?
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be pretty tricky. Something that's funny, I was thinking this morning about the last time you recorded with me. Do you remember what we talked about?
I do not.
So the second season, so I renamed this show and rebranded it in the fall, and it's in iTunes. Technically everything from here on out will appear as season 4, even though I restarted the episode numberings. So if you go back to what's technically called season 2 of this same show, Ben and I talked about it was, so every chapter for that season was about a chapter of my book, which is about getting digitally organized in the classroom. So we were talking about cloud drives and comparing Dropbox and Google Drive and iCloud and stuff. Something, speaking of that, but also Final Cut, that happened to me that was weird was, so like, do you do that thing where where like iCloud syncs your desktop across your different Apple devices?
I use iCloud somewhat like that. I know that I pull up my files on the iPad, but I don't use that a lot. I know that when I did the Final Cut thing, I took everything out of my documents folder and put it in a folder on my hard drive so it wouldn't have to work off the cloud.
Okay, so that's super smart. I'm not, I don't sometimes have the foresight. Well, in this case, I just really, like, the desktop was an easy place to work from because I have a lot of similar related files that I'm working with that are all, it's just a nice place to temporarily keep stuff. But yeah, I would advise anyone doing this to do what you did, because Final Cut will, I've set it up. I don't want duplicate copies of all my videos, so I have them referencing all the student video submission files, which are in a folder on my desktop. But iCloud, and when did we record that episode? Like 3 or 4 years ago we recorded that episode comparing iCloud and Dropbox. iCloud Drive, which is hundreds of times better, in fact I would even argue a viable replacement for Dropbox, it still cannot do the thing where you tell it that you want a specific folder. Like, no matter what, just make sure that this one stays local. Do not try to smartly decide that I'm running out of space on my disk and beam some of these files to the cloud and make me re-download them. Like, it,
No,
you know what I mean?
do that.
It can't do that yet. Dropbox has had that for like 10 years. So I'm doing Final Cut, and all of a sudden a bunch of my videos go black. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm all over the internet searching the forums of many different websites. And then finally, I just go to the desktop, and I realize that I have so much student video on my computer right now that iCloud decided to beam some of it up to the cloud. So I had to like re-download like half of the video files for a particular project to my hard drive that Final Cut was trying to reference, and it knew where the file was. It's just that the file was actually not living on my computer right at that time.
Yeah, I'm still old school in so many ways, just because I don't trust a lot of the newer technologies that I don't understand as well. So I actually have duplicate files of all these video things that I put in the Final Cut, just in case they doctor the old files and I don't have them anymore. I don't think they do. I think just reference them the way this technology works. But yeah, I tend to go a little bit overboard in that regard.
Well, that's good. More backup is better than less. I mean, the way that these kinds of programs work is they're non-destructive. So whether you dump an extra copy into your Final Cut project, or you just have that Final Cut project look to the place on your hard drive that they are, either way, if you like make a cut to a video or delete something, it's, it can come right back.
Yeah. And I hear that. I just don't trust it.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I gotta stop putting like big audio and video projects in my desktop and documents folders, because those sync. I mean, the benefit is, of course, if I create a file and I dump it on my desktop on one Mac, then I can get on my other Mac or my iPad and just open up the desktop there, and then it's waiting for me, just ready to go.
Yep. I also tend to use the whatever computer or device that I have that would work the best for that project. And so I don't tend to go back and forth between devices. Like this Final Cut project is on my laptop because it's the strongest computer I have. I'm not thinking about using it on the iPad or not.
Whereas I'm trying to think, how do I make every device I own a window into the same work? But when it comes to these really high, I mean, this is really the first, these virtual videos for the performing ensembles is the first time in a really long time that I have just simply had to throw up my hands and say, like, this is a Mac job. I've got to do this on the Mac.
It's really a Mac Pro job. I have a friend who does a lot of video editing. She's actually won an Emmy for her work. She will only get the big towers and run her video projects on that. Does her work pay for it, or does she freelance? The last time she bought it, she was still freelancing, so she had paid for it. I think that the current job supplies some things as well, but the one she has at home is the one she bought.
Because the new Mac Pros that came out not that long ago, they're not like hobbyist computers anymore. Like, you used to be able to, if you really, really wanted to spend like $3 or $4 grand on a Mac Pro, you could. Like, I have one from 2008, and I didn't even spend that on it. I got it secondhand. But like I mean, you can't really get a decent one for less than $8,000 now. Like, they're definitely, the market for them is definitely like, hey, we're a movie studio and we're gonna buy a bunch of these for our.
Yeah, the professional machines that
yeah.
You need to do only the highest level stuff that you need it for.
I bet the fans don't go crazy when you put 50 kids in a Final Cut video.
It probably won't flinch.
Probably not at all. Well, I have some follow-up that I need to address from the last episode, and then I guess, do we want to talk a little bit about the topic?
Sure.
So I've got some feedback from listener and recent guest. Last episode was all about automating stuff. It's kind of actually a little bit less music focused, more about automating the Mac with cool software, automating the home and certain life routines. And one of the things that I talked about with Craig, who was on that episode, was a Mac app called Alfred, which is a search app that can, like, you hit a keyboard trigger and then you get a little pop-up on the screen and you can, like, search files on your computer, or you can, like, have it do stuff for you. Like, for example, we were talking about things like jumping straight into Slack channels, like I have a little workflow in Slack where I type Slack, Denne, and then it just takes me straight into my one-on-one chat with you in Slack.
Cool.
So we were talking about how in Alfred you can create these custom searches where it's like you type in like I can type in Amazon space and then whatever, I'm trying to think, like a name of a book or something, and then it'll take me straight into the Amazon search results of that on Amazon's website rather than, Google search hits, which of course we're talking about saving like a couple clicks and taps here, but it's really useful. Same for Google Drive. I can type in Drive space, the name of a file, and if it's something that I'm working on for school that's in Google Drive, it'll usually take me straight to it. Well, David MacDonald, who was another recent guest, wrote to me, and he has a really good one that he has designed that searches the IMSLP database. And
oh, great.
I was like, I can't believe I've never thought about it. That's such a good idea. So if you are an Alfred user and you want to take advantage of this little thing, mine is set up so that I type in, like, I get Alfred on the screen and then I type in IMSLP space, and then whatever I type after that, it brings me straight to the search results on their website. So kind of cool. I'll throw in another bonus one. This is not musically relevant at all, but I also created a really fun one. If you're a nerd and you like Dungeons and Dragons, I have one that I made that automatically searches the 5th edition standard reference document. So some fun Alfred search workflows that I will throw in the show notes of today's episode. And that concludes follow-up.
I also will do that in just a Google search box. If you put IMSLP : and then search what you're looking for, it'll do the same thing.
That's a good one. I need to make one for JW Pepper next that searches, and it would be really fun. I'm sure that there's a way that's a little bit beyond my knowledge of how the web works, but I'm sure there's a way to create a search on a website like Pepper that even adds a couple of custom filters. Like, it would be really neat if I could type in the name of something and have it only look for wind band stuff.
Exactly. So you have something that has arrangement written for all sorts of instrumentations. You can narrow in on what you want faster.
Yeah, that'd be cool. So, today's topic is kind of, I don't know. I've in our note that I've shared with you, I've kind of split it into 2 or 3 different ways we can talk about it. At Ellicott Mills Middle School, we have, between the instrumental music teachers, we have been developing a sequential curriculum that's taught in the sectionals that I'm really proud of. It involves some philosophical ideas about how students learn skills, but it also involves a really heavy dependence on a program that you've designed in FileMaker. And I've had people email me before when FileMaker has been referenced. Like, I've said that I track student assessment data in it, and then I get usually a couple of responses anytime that comes up, like, tell me more about this. So what I thought we might do is, if you want to, maybe we can talk about what are the philosophies that sort of led to, like, how we teach skill-based curriculum at the middle school level, and then like what kinds of challenges does that present that FileMaker is able to solve.
Okay, well, let's start from the beginning. Normally we have large classes, and in instrumental music, it's usually around 50 or 60 kids at the minimum. And so if you're doing a normal class and you're trying to figure out how to teach them, they're all going to be in different places. And if you present something that's beyond a student's grasp, they get discouraged. If you present something that's way too familiar to them, they get bored. And there's a lot of things you can do besides requiring musicality and things like that to sort of get their interest in there. But if you're trying to develop technical skills, you really need to have an individualized curriculum that meets the kids where they are. And the most important thing about that is if it's stepwise, then the student has to be able to develop a mastery of one step before they can go on to the second step. And as long as they have those two things, if you have an individualized curriculum and you have a step-based sort of curriculum that they can work through, then they can make progress. And the challenge in that is twofold. Number one, you've got to keep it interesting. So we went with a lot of song-based type exercises so that they have a bunch of songs. This is something that is borrowed from the Suzuki method, and it's something that the private teachers use all the time. Every teacher that I know that I talk to has a series of solos that they work their students through that provide a curriculum. I was talking to Ron Munchnick, who's one of the violin pedagogues in the area, and you'd go to his recitals and you'd see the same pieces being played every recital, but of course by different kids. And he'd say, well, I picked this piece because it teaches this aspect. I teach this piece because it teaches this aspect. And each one would sort of build on the next and sort of work toward that mastery of the instrument that they're trying to get. Now, in a private teaching standpoint, you have just one-on-one instruction. You can cater to that student. You can move whatever speed you want. And it's much easier to manage any sort of individualized instruction where you're based entirely on goals and moving the process of moving forward with that one student. And when you start moving that into an instrumental curriculum in a school where you have many, many students, it becomes very, very difficult to keep track of. So the idea behind this curriculum was, number one, to break it down into smaller chunks. You can't really do an individualized curriculum with large whole pieces because they take more time than you have to spend with any one student. So instead of doing a 4-minute piece or a 5-minute piece, we picked a whole bunch of smaller songs. Mine limit about 30 seconds long, or if I have a piece that I'm giving the students, I'll break it down into sections so that they don't have to work with more than 30 seconds of music in an assignment. And then from there, the students have to move through and master each section of that. But if you have 180 students and everybody's in a different place, it becomes incredibly difficult to keep track of where students are at any one point. So years before I started using FileMaker, I had these sticker charts on the wall, and sticker charts are used quite often in education, especially on elementary school level, but it worked just as well with middle school students. And I was able to put the students on the wall and track where they were with the stickers, and they could see how they were making progress, and they could go on to the next one, and it would be something that they could pay attention to and focus on, and sort of see where the students are and compare themselves to each other and work. Sometimes they would be competitive with each other and see how many things they could learn, and anything that takes them away from just the fact that there's a teacher asking them to do something becomes something that they want to do on their own. It works really well for them. But it even got to the point where the sticker chart take up the entire wall, and then it got too big for the wall, and then I added more things, more exercises. So I needed something to manage it, and that was at the point where there was a number of different database programs, but Microsoft stopped supporting their database program, and then there was a program called Bento for a while that was just very, very limited in what it could do. And FileMaker was one that allowed you, it would set up the relationships between your databases fairly simply. You could have a way of changing the graphic interface that you dealt with and move things around. And then you could set up different relationships between the students, the list of exercises, and all the different components that you needed to keep track of. So FileMaker allows me to have one database where I have all of my students. It has another database where I have all of my assignments, or sorted by instrument and sort of numbered by level. And then you can create another database that I call performances, where you take information from, you pull up information from a student, and you pull up information from a performance piece, something on your curriculum, and you can combine them into a record that shows how students do on that one performance. And so you can include with that record a grade or a rubric. Actually, my rubric is embedded within the assignments. So when I pull up a student and I pull up an assignment to go with it, then it also pulls up the rubric and allows me to grade that at the same time. And so there's a tremendous number of different number of performances you can keep track of by doing it this way. I think my FileMaker program is up to 10,000 performances that I've graded from students throughout this method. So it allows me to keep track of that. And then once you have data on student performances of different parts of the curriculum, then FileMaker allows you to keep track of how far they're going on through the curriculum. You can see where students are. You can track progress. We use a 5-point rubric for our assignments. So trying to keep it simple for students that don't have too many things to think about. 5 points of mastery. And if they get each one, they get a star for. And so they can accrue a certain number of stars for each exercise that they do. And then we can then require them to earn a certain number of stars for the quarter, which signifies a certain amount of progression through the curriculum. So rather than having it be you have to get from point A to point B, and everybody has to do the same thing, you can now say to student number 1, here's your point A, and you need to earn this much progress, and then another student has another spot to go, which allows us a lot of differentiation between instruction. And then we can set our sectional groups around who is at which point in the sequence, and group kids according to what things that they're working on, so that we're seeing kids that are working on the similar things that are in a similar place.
Yeah, that's a pretty good setup for it. And specifically, you can say, and this sort of, I guess, in the same way that a sticker chart adds a little bit of an element of competition and even like gamification, you can structure the concept of progression in a way where it's like, okay, you can like play songs 1 through 5, but to show mastery on songs 1 through 5, you need to have, say, for example, 21 out of 25 of the possible stars available to you before you can progress onto being assessed on the next group of songs. So there's something like very concrete about it, but also like a student can feel like they're moving through those 5 songs without necessarily mastering it at first. I equate it to like going through the levels of Mario World and like just having some fun with the level, but then you eventually get to a point where like the next world is not open to you until you've received at least a certain minimum number of, actually literally Mario uses stars in it. You know, you need to get like the stars to progress and open up this new level. And only this is showing it through mastery of skills. And the rubric points are binary. Should we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. This is from the Duke book, right?
Yeah, the Robert Duke. He has the book Intelligent Music Teaching.
Yeah. So the idea that keeping the rubric incredibly simple and with yes and no questions. Was I sitting up straight when I played this piece? Like yes or no. If you're not sitting up straight, if you're not sitting with good posture, then you don't get that star. If you were, you do get that star. And trying to keep those points incredibly simple. Like if you're working on a scale passage, did I play the first note of the scale in tune? Did I not play the first note of the scale in tune? That is something that is a very concrete yes or no answer, and you can teach students about that in less subjective ways, because obviously there are some points where tuning is a little bit subjective. If you think about the leading tone, the 7th note of the scale, sometimes people like to hear it a little higher, sometimes they hear it a little bit lower. It depends on whether you're hearing it as the leading tone at the end of a scale, or if you're hearing it as the 3rd in the 5 chord. It's going to be in a different place. And so there's some aspects of tuning that can be very subjective, and some things that can be very objective. And the idea is to try to get as many objective things that students can think about as they can. And also this goes back to, I remember a lesson that I learned from Rex Martin back at Northwestern. he had a master class where he separated the art of playing and the craft of playing. And the idea is that there are certain things that all of us need to do in terms of the craft of learning our instrument that we have to focus in on. And they're not the most artistic part. They're cut and dry. They're the things that if you are doing them, then you're going to be a better player. And then outside of that, there's artistic side. So you get to the point where you have control of the instrument, and then you have choices that you're making artistically, phrasing-wise, dynamic-wise, what you're doing with a piece of music, what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to get across to your audience. But for the middle school level, we often are talking about technical skills, and we're really focused on that craft side of the instrument, like how to hold the bow correctly, how to make sure that the bow is going perpendicular to the string so it makes a good sound, how to make notes sound smooth and connected, how to different bowing styles. Are you holding, using the part of your fingers? Are you on the fingertips? Is your hand collapsed? These are very, very basic things that students need to get right. And so by giving them 3 or 4 or 5 to focus on for every assignment that we give them, we could say, all right, well, that's 5 stars because you did all 5 of those things while you played this piece. Whereas this one's 1 star because the piece sounded okay, but you didn't do A, B, C, or D, so you can't get those stars for that. And that is a little bit different for them.
Yeah, and things like intonation and tone, which I joke with the band students because our first 5 songs or so have a rotation of different postural related stars as the rubric, yes. But every single one of the first 5 songs demands that you play the note in tune and with I don't even require it to be a full or a clear tone quality. A steady tone quality is the language I use because just a steadiness and a stableness of here is a pitch that is centered is what I'm trying to reinforce. Even breaking it down to that smaller degree. But we joke that the 4th and the 5th star, the tuning and intonation star, are we spend a lot of time on songs 1 through 5 to get those stars because they do have to master it. Well,
it requires the ability to audiate. So the trick about tuning is you have to have a conception in your mind of what it is that you want to sound like before you can successfully learn how to tune any instrument or make something sound the way it's supposed to. The same thing to do with speaking. If I were to go to Russia or China or India or any place that speaks a language that I'm not familiar with and try to speak that language, I would have to spend a long time learning and listening to understand what that language sounds like in my head before I could successfully speak it. Even though I'm speaking for a very long time, I have control over my voice. If I don't have a conception of what it is that I need to sound like, then I'm not going to be successful with that. And so students, even though they might have played their instruments for a couple of years before they come to the middle school, many of them don't have a conception of what it is that they're trying to hear or a way to hear the pitch that they're trying to do at playing. And so that it takes a long time to develop that audiation skill for some of those students. I had one student who I taught privately for trombone for many, many years, and it was a huge challenge because that was something that it was a huge barrier to the point where every lesson I would buzz a note on the mouthpiece and ask him to buzz that note back. And he would get closer, and sometimes he would get farther away. Sometimes I'd ask him to buzz with me, and he would be somewhere close to the pitch, but not exactly right. And over the course of a 45-minute lesson every week, was literally just trying to match pitch and buzzing for a good half of that lesson. It took him about 4 or 5 years to get to the point where he could match pitch. Now that was an extreme case. Most students will do it faster than that, and some students will come to the middle school and breeze through the very beginnings of the sequence because they have the audiation skills. But for many, many students, it does take a little bit of time to do that. And by taking the technique away from that and saying, here's long tones, or here's straight quarter notes that are not moving around a whole lot, and you're trying to match pitches, it takes a while to get that in place.
So one of the tools that we both use in our teaching that helps with this is tuning drones.
Sure.
And those are kind of built into the expectation of the assignment. So like Tonal Energy tuning app is, I think, we both prefer the flexibility and the power. It's a polyphonic tuning drone app. It can go into just intonation, so you can model for a student specifically like how to, like lower the third of the chord, for example, in a given key. But then also our, and we'll talk later about how FileMaker generates automatically these assignment packets for them. But like there's a specific tuning drone and register along with metronome marking on each assignment that a student is expected to then take out tonal energy and turn the metronome and the tuning drone on to model that stability of pitch.
Right, and the idea is based around the fact that there are very, very few students that have perfect pitch. So all of them have to learn relative pitch. And the only way to learn relative pitch is having more than one pitch at the same time. So if you have a piano, if you're working as a piano player, you're learning intervals by playing more than one note at the same time. If you're playing violin, viola, cello, bass, band, flute, clarinet, oboe, you're playing one note at the same time, especially at the beginner level. I mean, yes, it's possible to play more than one note on a string instrument, but you're not doing that with a beginning student. You're trying to play one note, and so to have another note to tune to reference allows them to establish that idea of what two notes sound like together, and they start to hear what a unison is, what is an octave, what is a fifth, what is a fourth. And then as they get better at that, then we move to thirds and sixths and seconds and sevenths, and more complicated intervals and things that are harder to hear. But at the same time, they need to have an idea, develop that ideation skills. And this goes back to, I was doing some grad work, and there was a whole bunch of aptitude tests that they used to give musicians, 50, 60 years ago, where it was the Gordon Aptitude Profile, where they would give these tests to students and then determine whether they were suitable for music instruction. The idea that if you singled out those students that were predisposed to learning music well, then you would have more successful programs. And all these were a bunch of audiation tests. So they found that students that could audiate performed better in music class. Big surprise. If you can hear the music in your head, you tended to be able to learn how to play an instrument faster than someone who could not hear music in their head. And so going back and applying it to modern teaching, if you find students that have auditory ability and they're going to do better, well, how do you teach that audiation to students? How do you provide those pitch references in a way that students can then develop those auditory skills? And that's where the drone work comes in, and that's where the pitch reference work comes in, because they can play, even if they play a melody against the root or a chord underneath it. It's very similar to, again, when you're going to a private lesson and the teacher either plays with you or they play piano while you play your part. These are the things that students have been doing for a long time to develop these ideation skills. We just have to do it in an automated fashion because we're not with them all the time.
Right. So for the other kinds of rubric points, because inevitably this development of tone and pitch concept, this ability to audiate is sort of the centerpiece of the philosophy. Like these are the kinds of things that develop early on, maybe whereas another teacher might prioritize like a greater variety of articulation or rhythmic understanding. This tonal concept sort of is like the starting point, and once mastered, I think you've when you have in past times told me the story about that trombone private student, you've remarked how like once the tonal concept was there, then like the technique he could fly. Like there was nothing you couldn't put in front of him that he couldn't play, because
he was a junior in high school, or sophomore in high school, and he was in the beginning band in that school, and it was one of those schools that separated and had a beginning band that did not do a lot of performing, and had an advanced band that did all sorts of amazing things. But you had to get to the point where you could test into the upper band to do anything really worthwhile in that music program. And he really wanted to do that. But it was his sophomore year, right, probably around February or March, where it started to click and he started to be able to match pitches. And we started with the unison, And once you got the unison, it wasn't that hard of a stretch to get the fifths and get the intervals, and then develop that. And then by his junior year, he was in the group. He got into the top group, and then the senior year, he was the section leader. From not being able to play his way out of a paper bag, just because he had finally got the audiation point in place. And we see this all the time, especially with middle school students. If you're sitting there lost and you're like, teacher says press this button and blow your air here, and you're trying to make sense of it all from an engineering standpoint, not from a musical standpoint, it gets incredibly complicated very, very quickly. And if you make that switch to think about it from a musical standpoint, it becomes incredibly simple. The exact opposite of that one student on trombone was a tuba student that I had, where Jen Cherry over at Worthington had suggested he take lessons. He was a fourth grader, wanted to play tuba, and I suggested, well, why don't we do two 15-minute lessons a week to start off with. And so he came for 2 15-minute lessons a week. It wasn't that far from his house to get to the school. And so we started with just matching pitches and starting with the audiation from the very get-go. And he was one of those students that, because he never learned a complicated way, I was able to keep in terms of the Arnold Jacobs wind and song philosophy throughout his entire elementary school and middle school time. And by the time he got to high school, he had a 5-octave range on the tuba, and he could play anything that I was learning how to play in college. But it was because he had developed the ideation from a young age, and then was able to take that and apply it to more complicated things as he went through it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is really like learning a language. Like, you can't really develop a vocabulary when you don't have a fundamental ability to mimic your speech after the mother tongue, like on basic words and sentences and phrases.
So a lot of times we're coming into kids that are farther along than that, because we're getting them when they're older, and they try to make it more complicated than it needs to be, and we have to break it down into very simple concepts again.
Right, and I find that's for that reason our sequence starts really slow. Like, my first couple of songs involve like 1 or 2 notes each. But and the only reason they involve more than one note is to just give them some sort of sense of being a song, that a student is like, oh, hey, I'm playing a song, not just a note over and over. Because that was my mistake on my first draft of this, was like a couple of the first examples were like long tone exercises. And well, okay, if you like take all of those G's on trumpet and you like stick a quarter note F in between them and call it playing soul with soul, like all of a sudden the kid is like, I'm playing a song, it has a title. It has a rhythm to it, right. But really, like, most of it is just long G's with a couple of F's between. But like this, they start this way, but then like by the time that a student of mine is on song like 20 to 25 of the packet, again, it's the same thing. I feel like there's like so many things I can put in front of them, because they've really got that basis of tone developed.
Yeah.
So the other side of it, like I think we got talking about audiation. I wanted to talk about it anyway, but I think the springboard to talking about it was that it's a little bit more of a subjective area. A lot of the criteria, especially in these earlier stages, are really, really concrete. And what I love about having these, especially in the first couple of songs of the sequence, these postural pieces, like feet flat on the floor being a point, spine straight, shoulders loose. What I like about it is not only is it concrete to me and another student, but I can have, like, my principal has come onto the stage of the sectional before and can totally look at the rubric and give a pretty good guess as to what the student, and with having no musical background at all.
Right. That stops after a few lessons, though.
It does, but I think though that then what at least any administrator who's seen this method that we're doing has remarked is that even though they can't like follow it conceptually all the way, that it always is offering the student a really concrete understanding of how to get from point A to point B.
Not only that, but you can explain to administrators and parents why students are progressing or why they're not progressing. You can point to very specific things and said, yeah, well, this grade is a B or a C because Johnny didn't do this, and this, and if he this, and this, he can improve his grade, and that's all it takes. It gives them very concrete ways to figure that out, which is helpful.
Right. Are there other things like philosophically you want to unpack? I mean, like we could do a whole episode on just this, but I at some point think it makes sense to describe like why are we using a relational database to track what, like you said earlier, what a poster and some stickers could do.
Well, the poster and stickers has its limitations. It has its limitations in how much room it takes. That it takes up way more space than I have. I'd be on 4 or 5 walls to try to get it in the right spot now. And it's also got limitations in how much it can communicate. It can only communicate to students when they're in front of it. They can't see where they are when they're not in that room or that space, and they're not in that space very often. They're, for orchestra, if they're a cello or bass player, they're in that room once every 2 weeks, which is not enough for them to keep track of. There's no way of having the students be able to see what their assignments are in real time with that sticker chart, because you can't attach pieces of paper to the wall so they can look at them. That would be a big mess. And lastly, there's no way to communicate that with parents because the parents are coming in the building to see where they are on a sticker chart. So wanting to have the ability to communicate to a student by email where they are, to a parent by email where a student is, to be able to give updates on how things are going, and to be able to automate those updates so they don't take extra time, are huge advantages to having the relational database. I can pull up on my FileMaker performance page, and I can hit the new performance button. I can go to the student select. I can press the student select button and start to type the student's name. It'll reduce the list of students as I keep typing more letters until I can choose the student that I want. When I choose the student, then it recognizes which instrument that they play, and then I go to the assignment list, and I'm only looking at, if I've got a viola player, I'm only looking at viola assignments. I can pull up the viola assignment list and can select that, and the rubric automatically populates into the screen that I'm looking at. So I'm talking about a lot of things here in terms of grading and recording information. But really, I had one click and a couple of keystrokes to get a student's name. I had one click and a small drag to get the piece and the rubric in place. And all of this takes, about 10 seconds. And I now have a whole performance record. As the student is playing, I have little radio buttons that I can hit yes or no to say if they've mastered each part of the rubric. I have a little text box that I can type notes that I want to have to go to the student. And then when they're done, there's a button that says email, and I can either hit that email button and email it right away, or if I wrote a script where I can send an email to all of the performances that happen that day, which I generally tend to do because it takes a little bit of time for the program to email it. So it's like a very automated way of saying, all right, here is my grading thing. I'm communicating all this to the students happening in real time, rather than the normal grading, which takes much longer than you want it to. And also giving verbal feedback to the student. And the parents are seeing not only their performances from that sectional time, but they're also seeing an update of where they are in the scope of the whole curriculum, because you can send them an update and say, this is the songs that they worked on, these are the songs that they assigned, this is their scores, this is how they're doing in comparison to other students. They can see all that data in every single time you give them a playing exam, or every time they come to a sectional. And this is in other subjects, this is what we only have when I was looking at my daughter's in first grade, and they're talking about placing them in different courses based on what they were, where students were doing, and so it's the idea of still tracking students, putting them in places where they are with like-minded students who are doing similar things. And I asked, well, what data points do you guys use? Like, well, we use our map testing data. Like, that's great. Like, how often do you do that? They're like, once a year. Like, okay. So they have one data set once a year that they can use to then group kids in the right spot and make sure that they're doing similar things. And then at that same point, you're still talking about 20 or 30 students all doing the same activities at the same time, which takes this process, but not nearly to the step that we want to take it. So we want to be able to have data points every single time they perform, which happens like every 2 weeks. We can then adjust their sectionals. We do that once a quarter. We have multiple data points by which to base that adjustment on. And then we can ensure that if a student starts to take off, then they're going to move up fairly rapidly through the groups, and we can support that. If a student gets stuck on something, we can keep them in the same spot and keep them working on the same thing that they need to master until they master it. And it allows us a tremendous amount of flexibility. And the FileMaker program allows me to know where all those students are and do it accurately with a whole bunch of data-driven stuff, which principals love.
They do. All right, you mentioned a ton of stuff that I want to unpack, but you did just say something that I think ties in more to the philosophy of things. But you were talking about having that one point in the year of data. It makes me think about how it's not uncommon for a young instrumentalist to have the placement of their ensemble be dictated by an audition at the end of the year. And I think this is
how nervous do they get for that?
Right. And I think that having this kind of sequential based thing, I mean, like you said, you're collecting multiple data points per student per week if you're seeing them that often, and the feedback is always crystal clear to them how to improve. And so you're assessing improvement over time rather than kind of like a snapshot, of one time in history.
Yeah, and you're trying to figure out who's going to be in your ensembles, and you're saying, all right, well, I have these students that have accomplished this and they can do these things, and I have these students that accomplish this and do these things. You can very easily and confidently put students in the correct ensemble, knowing that you've seen the skills demonstrated that they need to perform in those ensembles.
Well, I want to unpack the relational database just a little bit. I mean, we're not going to talk about how all of the database works because, like, for example, having the automatic emailing of parents is a script that you wrote, and I don't think that writing FileMaker scripts is in the scope of a verbal, voice-based podcast.
No, there are certain things that are more easy to do, and then certain things that are more difficult to do.
But I think the essentials are there. I mean, you explained it earlier really, really well. There's a relational database for anyone who does not know what it is. I mean, I think FileMaker is what it can make is almost really like a custom application. But what is underneath the hood of it and how I relate to it as a program is I think of it as different Excel spreadsheets that can talk to one another. So like you said, you have a spreadsheet of student names, a spreadsheet of songs with rubrics associated with them, and then you have this other spreadsheet of records that basically say this student played this piece at this time and got these points.
Correct.
But what FileMaker does is it gives you the ability to create a user interface to the way that you can interact with these spreadsheets. So you don't have to look at that third spreadsheet I just mentioned like it's a sheet of columns and rows. What you can do is you can go into some editing tools, which are very friendly if you've ever used Microsoft Word or Pages before. You can make drag little boxes in certain places and add buttons in certain places and add text fields and change the font and the color. You're basically designing a document, but the information in that document are the records that are coming from the different spreadsheets in your database. And that's all a relational database is it's different databases that relate to one another. But this idea of being able to create a custom app or UI that reveals to you and lets you interact with the data is kind of a centerpiece. Like when we look at our performance record screen, which is one of the views in our database, I think it's worth mentioning. You have an orchestra database, and then Nicole, who teaches band also at Ellicott Mills, and I share a band database, which is yours, but you haven't always added all the cool features yet. So it's periodically you go in and you do some housekeeping and you fix all my really bad habits of creating dummy records that don't have a student name in the field, and then you add stuff. So
right.
So but what you've done with this performance record is we don't actually see a spreadsheet. What we see is it looks, I don't know how to describe it, but it's basically just a little text box where we type in the student name, and it's got a custom search that she built in, which is a tool that FileMaker offers you to include on this. I think layout is the word I'm looking for. Is that
the layout is right. And to start, to start this, I started simple. I did not start where I am now, because anytime you use or you're learning how to manipulate any sort of programming language or computer type thing, you don't start out with having all the information that you want. So the first part of it is just trying to learn how relational databases work, because you have a spreadsheet, you have a database is exactly as Robby was saying. It's a spreadsheet. It's a list of records, and so learning how to do a primary key and a secondary key, where you can then relate one database to another, allows you to do a lot of this wonderful stuff. So to have the key for this was learning how to create the performance database. Creating the student database was incredibly easy. That's the same thing as doing an Excel spreadsheet and having last name, first name across the top, instrument, all that kind of stuff that you would put in there, and a list of students underneath it. It's made a little simpler because you can make a layout so that you can look at each record in a nice neat form viewpoint instead of just in the spreadsheet. Although you have a chance you can toggle back and forth between the spreadsheet view and the form view. And the same thing was true of the assignments. It was not hard to say, title of piece, number of piece in the sequence, the instrument that it's for, what questions are you asking for the rubric for each one of these things, and that's a spreadsheet in itself. And so again, I view it as a form more often than not, because it allows you to, and FileMaker allows you to do really cool things with fields. So I say the word field. And so if you think about a column on a spreadsheet, that would be a equivalent for a field. So last name would be a field, first name would be a field, and every record would be a row. And so if my name is Ben Denne, in my row from my record, the field that said last name would say Denne in that spot, and the field that said the column or the field that said first name would say Ben, and I go all the way through this, and FileMaker has a lot of different field types, so you could have container fields as well. So in an Excel spreadsheet, you couldn't just go to a box in a certain row and column and insert a piece of music in a picture form. But FileMaker allows you to do that as a container field. So one of the fields or one of the columns that you would have in your database could be a container that would have a picture of the song that you're trying to have students play. And so that becomes part of that record, that assignment record. So those two aspects are the easier parts of using FileMaker. Making a list of students and making a list of assignments is the first place that you would want to start if you're trying to put this together. And then what you do with the relational part is you create what we call a join database. So when you have two databases you want to relate to each other, you have one student who's going to do a whole bunch of assignments, so it's one to many, but you also have one assignment that's going to be done by many students, so that's also one to many. You can't have two relationships that go from one to many and make sense of it. So you create a third database and call it performance, and so each record of that will have a one to many relationship going back to that. So a student may have many iterations or records within that join database, and the assignments will have many iterations within that join database. But in each record, you're only using one student and one assignment, and so you have that one-to-many relationship that allows you to create that relational database. And so in that joined database, you can now create records of each instance of a student interacting with an assignment, and it becomes a record unto itself. So whereas you're only going to have the number of records for the number of students you have in the student database, and you're only going to have the number of records for the number of assignments in your assignment database, my join database, that's the one that has 10,000 records, because it has every instance of the student interacting with the assignment within that. And that's the very basic part of how to make the database happen. You can get a lot more involved with the scripts, but you have to understand the idea between how databases have to relate to each other, and you have to understand the use of primary and secondary keys. And I think I watched a Lynda video on this, lynda.com. They had a whole bunch of instructions on that. And that part I was able to get on my own, just with a little bit of instruction on how those things put together and how they work.
Yeah, I'm going to include a link to that series. Actually, I'll include a link to a couple of useful FileMaker training tutorials that are on lynda.com. I'll put those in the show notes. So you've got these two spreadsheets. You've got a join spreadsheet that is, linking data between the two. And then FileMaker also, every one of these can sort of be viewed. You were talking about how you can see it in a way that looks like an Excel spreadsheet, but you can also view it as a form where you're toggling through the records. And that's
Right.
the custom view, right? Like that you can sort of change the layout of.
Right. You have different layouts for different things that you want to do. I have one layout that I use for inputting student data. That makes it really easy for me to see all the things I'm putting in about a student. I've got one layout that I use for putting in assignment data that lets me see what an assignment looks like. I have the performance form, which is the layout that I use for the database that I use when I join that together. But I also have layouts that I use for different things. I have a layout that I put together that when I attach it to an email only has the information I want to share with the student or parent at that moment. So instead of having more information than it needs, then it has just that little bit. And then there's different ways. When I was we had to do student learner objectives or SLOs for our school, and so I made a layout that just showed the information our principals needed to see the progress that the students were doing. And so I was able to just take information from those files that they had in place and go. The scripts get as complicated as you want to have them. If I was just saying for students, I want to just calculate the whole number of stars that they've earned, and that's it, then it would be a fairly simple script. I decided I wanted to keep track of how many stars they were earning per quarter and how many stars they were earning over the course of the year, and separate them into different quarters and try to make sure that I was keeping track of growth for that consistency. And that script is probably the longest and most convoluted script in my whole database. And then probably the one thing that if I had to do over again would probably still have to hire someone to help me write. Honestly, there's parts, especially some scripts, where I hired consultants to walk me through steps. There are people who work as FileMaker consultants. They charge like $70 an hour, and so you buy packages of 10 or 20 hours, and you try to use that time as wisely as possible in building your scripts. But it's still an investment.
Yeah, the SLO one. So I mean, most teachers have some sort of student learning objective that they are working towards that is a part of their teacher evaluation. For us, we have made our SLO, all of our instrumental music teachers, that a student will earn a certain number of stars per year. That's a simple way of putting it. But because the stars are measuring growth, they're not just arbitrary points. What that means is that how many you've earned is showing, well, how many more do you have now than you did at the beginning of the year when you took the baseline data. And what's great about your SLO script is and actually speaking of scripts, you can make scripts very simple too. Some of my custom scripts are just keyboard shortcuts that take me to specific layouts in the database.
Yep.
And I can hit a keyboard shortcut that takes me to that layout and runs that script that you made. And so what used to be me manually looking through lots of different documents and entering numbers into an Excel spreadsheet right before I go in to meet with my principal 3 times a year, now I hit one button on my computer and there's a very specific sheet that I can print to PDF and attach in an email to them that shows and you even added this one field that judges whether or not they're on target, beyond the target, or behind target,
right,
relative to that point in the year, how many points they should have along that path to say 25 stars is your annual number. Like if it's the mid-year data and they don't have 15 stars, it'll say be behind, and it just makes this really easy springboard for principals to have discussion with you. Also, they love it. Like your principal will completely trust everything you ever say and do if you have a system like this. I mean, it's just
Well, you're telling them exactly where each one of the students that you have is within the process of the curriculum, and you can speak to what they've been able to accomplish in very objective terms. And they're used to talking to teachers that have classes of 30, very few data points, and they have sort of subjective ideas of where their students are, but it's not data driven as much, and it's not as concrete, and it's not as easy to back up to other stakeholders. So yeah, they're trying to move in this direction. Like most things, music tends to be a little bit ahead of other subjects in education because of two reasons. Number one, you have to have an incredibly strong level of mastery to be successful in a music curriculum. You've all sure have heard of those experiments where you have your group just play 5 wrong notes in an entire piece, and then they all play them at different times, and it sounds pretty atrocious, even though they probably played 98% of the notes correctly. And you can see how quickly it degenerates into cacophony. And so from a music perspective, we're used to having that mastery or near mastery required to have anything that sounds halfway decent to our ears. Whereas the rest of the education world is content with partial mastery and moving forward. We have, I was asked by a principal once, how come all your students always get A's in orchestra? And the answer is because when it's a B or C work, it's unacceptable. It has to get fixed, otherwise it won't work. And so we work at that. There are some students that really fight me, and they get B's because they can't get to that level of mastery that we're trying to get to. But it's not because the curriculum is simple. It's very far from that. It's just that you get instant feedback of when you have it right and you don't get it right, and you have to get it, and you have to keep going until you have mastery of it. Whereas other subjects, you can get a B or a C and get passed on to the next class. And if you imagine that you're in a math class and you almost understand addition, you're getting the hang of it, but not quite there. And the next thing you know, they're throwing multiplication at you, and suddenly you're failing, and they're wondering, how come you went from a B student to a D student? How come you can't do this multiplication? It's because you didn't understand really how to do the addition at the level you needed to understand it, to understand how to do the multiplication. And so they deal the same things with other teachers, but we are able to tell them exactly where these students are, and they appreciate that because I think it's where the goals are for much of education.
Right, and I think the micro bite-size songs that are in the sequence also reinforce the idea that we're assessing always, not necessarily putting an assignment in the grade book, but I remember this was like something that was like really hard for me to grasp as an early teacher, teaching in a district that was a little bit more fixated on verbiage and, sort of controlling the process that teachers communicated student progress than maybe our current district is. And I remember really having to fixate with my mentor teachers on the idea of what, when, and how I was assessing, and really early on having to understand that I was assessing my students so much more often than other teachers in the building, because every time they pick up their instrument and make a sound, I'm assessing them, yes. Whether that's going in the grade book or not. And having these really small musical examples closes what we call it this feedback loop. The student plays for me, I interpret, I give feedback to help them improve, they interpret that feedback, they play again, and then the cycle continues. The more you can increase the amount of concrete data that's happening throughout that circle, like you said, you have 10,000 performance records.
Yeah.
That's
last 2 years.
Right. So that's insane. Now, I'm kind of switching gears here a little bit. One of the other layouts that is really useful to us is you've created a layout that organizes the different components of the assignment records in a way where it looks like it's a page of a method book to a student. So if I've attached a little screenshot of a musical excerpt, if I've told it, what's the metronome tempo setting, if I've told it the tuning drone, what are the 5 stars each for, you've created this page where the music is not just a little tiny screen grab. It's a third of the page so that it's readable, and then the title is really big, and the rubric points are highlighted very clearly in a table at the bottom of the page. Do you have to, in FileMaker, do you have to create a database for every layout, or can you have multiple layouts that associate with
Oh no, you would never create a database a layout for or a database for every layout because you have so many different layouts. When you have data, it has different things that different people have to see. As a teacher who's grading, I need to be able to pull up the student's name. I need to pull up the assignment. I need to get the rubric at it. I'll have a small picture of the assignment just to remind me which one it is, with a little spot that reminds me where I need to set the tuning note and the metronome. But I also have to have a box that I have to put some comments in. I want to have the email button if I want to email students. So that's all in that layout. But if I'm a student, I need very different things. I need to know the title of the piece. I need to know where it is in which assignment number it is. So if Mr. Denne says I need to do assignment number 13, I can figure out which one's assignment number 13. So that's in big bold on the top. I need to be able to see the piece in full size. So the majority of the screen is now that container field that we have in our assignments. Instead of being a small box on your screen, it now takes up most of the page. I need to have it formatted for 8.5 by 11 white paper. Whereas the teacher view I look at is got a lot of color contrast and things that draw my eyes to places where I really need to focus. There's also little boxes that show the tuning note and the metronome marking consistently in the same place on every box. There's a smaller box on the left-hand side that has the rubrics, so it tells the students which things they're working for. And then one of the things that I started to do that I still have to flush out is there's so many YouTube recordings and links, especially since I use a lot of the Suzuki method in what I do. And I can put the links to the bottom of each in the bottom of each page, so if they're looking at it on our website, they can click on a link and see an instructional video on how to play that assignment. And so all of that is in place in that layout the student's seeing. Both that layout and the one that I look at when I grade both reference the same database. That database has 30 or 40 fields in it that are all populated with things related to each one of those assignments. And as I said before, the longer you live with something, the more you fill it out and the more you make it more robust with what you have and make it more useful. So when I first started, I didn't have the student layout. The student layout came from the fact that I wanted to. Well, I had all these books, but I was passing out the books, and then they would return them to me, and they couldn't find the right page. I wanted to get to a point where I could just make a packet. I still own all the books. I still have all those things that I'm using, but instead of working with all those books, I can have like a whole series of exercises I can keep in a file bin right in front of my class, and I can hand out those and collect them again at the end. The students know how to get to those exercises, and they can see everything right in front of them. I can also post them online. And each one of them has like a title page that says the exercises that are used in this packet are pulled from book A, book B, book C. In order to use this packet, it's required that you buy all these books before you use this packet. Otherwise, we're in violation of copyright, because I don't want to take any money away from the publishers of those books. So where I'm providing a way for students to access this information quickly, it's not a replacement in the least bit for purchasing the books, because you want the students not only, like if you're doing a Suzuki piece and you're breaking it down into a bunch of different things, you want to have the packet that shows just the 2 lines that they have to work on for that one exercise. But you also want them to have that book so that they go and they finish the whole piece. They have the whole piece that they can use to perform for a recital or for a living room concert or any of those different things. You want them to have that resource.
Yeah. Very true. And you've sort of, as you have developed this, you've added features to the database that are sort of like peripheral to the student assessment piece of it. Like you've got a database. I shouldn't use the word database 2 different ways in the same sentence, but like you've got a database. I guess FileMaker calls the actual like file an app, right? Like when you design something in FileMaker, like you have an app, and then the databases within that app are like I've referred to them as like spreadsheets earlier in this episode. But like is the term in FileMaker for a spreadsheet of records, is that a database?
So there's a number of different things. They call them all databases. So within any app you have, you have a number of databases. And then you could also, actually, I take that back. They call them tables.
There we go.
That's the word that they use. Because you go to the manage database command to get to all of them, but I had forgotten that they use the word tables. So yeah, they use the word tables to describe each one of those like Excel spreadsheet type things that you would use. And yeah, then you have relationships between tables to build your database, and then every table has a number of fields.
So you've got, I don't know if you're using a table for it or not, but you've got a layout where you actually track records of pieces you've performed on concerts, which then you can like go back and review the last time. Like if you're programming a concert and you're trying to see if you've done it with that same group of kids, you can really easily see that information.
Right. So that's another example of how simple relationship that you have to students and assignments. So I made a music library table to track all the pieces that I have so I could file things back in the library and find them. Obviously, when you've got music, you have that option of doing it alphabetically, or you can do it by record number. And if you do it alphabetically, then every time you get a new piece, you've got to move every single thing in your file to make room for the new piece, and it can be a big mess. But if you do it by record number, then you have to have a database where you can look up the record. And so having a table where I just have all of the pieces that we have in our library, and then I can search for it and then pull up the number, then I can keep them all organized in my library by number, and that's easy. I can also have a database that has concerts, where I can say this is this is a concert we've done, and then I can combine those into a performance entry, where I take an example of a piece from the library, and I add a piece from the concert and show how those two interrelate to each other. So I can say on this date we had this concert and we had this piece from the library, and that becomes a record that I can then pull back into the library. So I can look at the music library and say, all right, there's this piece, I performed it 3 years ago, I performed it 5 years ago, and I performed it 8 years ago. So it's in heavy rotation, but it's not been too long since I've done it in a recent amount of time. I can do it again, or wait, I did that last year, I forgot about it, because as I get older, I forget about when I play pieces constantly. I have not always done the best job of keeping up with that database. And so there's been times, especially in the last couple of years, where I pull out a piece and I hand it out to students, and they're like, "We've played this already." I'm like, "Oh, okay, hand it back in." I'm trying to avoid those experiences as much as possible because they're time intensive. So by creating a basic relationship in there, when I pull up the piece, when I look it up, I can see when I've done it last. And as long as I do a good job of recording those performances in there, then I can avoid all the work of getting a piece prepared to give to a student, a group, just to have to pull it right back because I didn't remember it correctly.
You mentioned a while back Bento, just in passing, and Bento was made by the same company. It was kind of like Baby FileMaker. They would do a lot of the relationship building for you and user interface building for you. So like you could have like they basically made templates. Like here's a template for inventory of things you own in your home, and then it would have like a nice brown leather background and look all home cozy, right. and then you would just type in everything into form fields like it was a database, and then you wouldn't have to build any of the back end. Bento, as you implied, has for a long time not been with us. I did want to mention, for people who think that relational databases might be interesting and they do not want to or do not have the means to afford a tool like FileMaker right away, we've talked about this a little bit, but there's a really cool, it's one of these, like, how everything is like a web service these days, like, yep. Trello and Evernote, and it's one of these like web services where it's a website. Of course, there is an app for iPad, iPhone, Android, the Mac, Windows. But what it is it is a web-based relational database. And they've done kind of what Bento accomplished. They've made something that looks really friendly and easy to use, where you can customize what all the fields are in your database. And then they designed this like really bright, bubbly, colorful user interface where you interact with it. And I actually use it for some personal things. Like I have a situation where it's like I like to keep track of coffee that we order that I really like. So I created like a little coffee. I forget what the technical term is, if they call it like a database or a table in Airtable. But basically I've created this whole workspace called coffee, and I've got one list of records that's coffees that we've ordered, and then I've got another list of records that's a list of roasters, and then I've got a third record that links the two together. Only that third record is like far less transparent than if you're using a power tool like FileMaker. Like you don't really have to think about that join piece of the equation. You just can more automatically connect the databases. For example, when I'm in my coffee database, I can add a field to that. Like I could say like, okay, this coffee is from Columbia. It's from Case Coffee Roasters in Ashland, Oregon. And then that like Case Coffee in Oregon field is actually like a magic field that can link to another database inside of my workspace. So you don't have to do all of this like kind of creating the connections between things with Airtable. And what's cool about it is if you're a super nerd, you can like, they have an API where you can like automate it to do stuff for you. I haven't really gotten into that yet, but I know that people who listen to this show who have listened to it for a while or who have followed it from my other podcast, The Class Nerd, you can do a whole lot of things with automating the web. And I say this all to kind of pivot to this new Claris announcement. I don't know if you have anything.
Let me add one thing to that. I was at Midwest a few years back, and I was talking to the people who make Charms, which is a marching band management software program, where you can track who gets its uniform. You can track a whole bunch of different like logistical things. And I was talking about how I was doing similar things with FileMaker, and they had talked how they had started that company based on a FileMaker database, and they got to the point where they were able to hire some developers, and they moved to SQL and some more of the more industry accepted things that you can do require more programming skills than I had. So there's a lot of different places that will do little pieces of it. The advantage of doing it yourself is you have customizable skills. You can do exactly what you want it to do. The drawback is it takes a lot of learning. And if you're looking at FileMaker for this kind of thing, understand the price tag is one thing, but the time you spend just investing in it is another investment that you have to consider.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And now that you mentioned Charms, and I'll link all this in the notes, you made me think of another thing. One of the things that we can't automate with our process is the actual entering of the data. Like we have to be there, present with the student, listening to them, which of course has its benefits. I mean, it's like we're doing what we do best. We're teaching in our natural form, and then additionally we are then going into this database and entering the performance record. But if there was a tool that could automate the performance part of it and the assigning of rubric points to the kid, but it didn't have all these other layers of scripting and automation that you can customize in FileMaker, would you be tempted by that tool? Is something that we've talked about before. And I'm bringing this up because there's been an announcement lately that maybe you heard about.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
No, I mean, there's so much to the automation part of this, because there's only, like if, for instance, in my circumstance, under normal circumstances, I only get to see these students in sectionals once every 2 weeks. And so to have the continuity of instruction is not incredibly a strong part of this, because I don't get to see them that often. To have them be able to submit things more often and get feedback more often and move forward through the curriculum independent of me would be a huge thing. And so, my mind is always going to what happens if you are able to have students submit videos, and well, then there's a ton of videos that you'd have to listen to. You couldn't keep up with it. It'd still be bad. But what if you had a situation where students could then log on and assign stars to different students' videos? So they could you could go and record something, and then 3 students would listen to it and assign stars, and all 3 of them would have to give you 5 stars for you to get credit for that. But then you'd have something in place where students would have to grade 3 assignments to be able for every single one that they submitted. So not only would they have to listen to each other and evaluate those same criteria that they're working toward, but then they would also have to do that as a cost for being able to submit their own recordings. So that would be a sustainable thing. And so that would be awesome, but at programming level, that is so far been beyond my skill set.
So the reason I brought it up is because we've talked about like the MusicFirst, the Noteflight, the SmartMusic kinds of apps that are out there. I know that MusicFirst's offering is called PracticeFirst, and PracticeFirst, SmartMusic, and now Noteflight Learn, which is like the learning management software that is associated with Noteflight, the company that does web-based score editing. These 3 applications will assess pitch and rhythm accuracy for the student, and then we'll integrate the scoring data into third-party learning management systems like Canvas, Google Classroom, Blackboard. We have considered some of these tools before, but I know that one of the real hang-ups, other than the technical limitations of our school district and that whole fight of like advocating that this is software that's worth not only buying, but then like integrating into the back end, because there's some issues with single sign-on.
Yeah, privacy issues as well.
Privacy stuff, yeah. But one of the other issues that we've run into is like, well, how, if we're focusing on audiation, how does this thing serve the interests that we have in teaching pitch accuracy? So Noteflight Learn very recently announced that they are integrating with, I'm gonna after I stop talking, I'm gonna Google it so I can say the name. It's a company that does, pitch and rhythm analysis, because Noteflight started as basically like an alternative to using Sibelius, but on the web. So it's kind of like the Google Docs of Sibelius or Finale,
right?
Sibelius or Finale, But then they added on top of this ability to make music notation on a website, they added this learning management thing. So in other words, SmartMusic like features where you can take a Noteflight example and then turn it into a performance record that a student could play into their computer. But then because Hal Leonard owns Noteflight, it's also got a bunch of the Hal Leonard publications also available as songs that a student could be assessed, that a student could perform into their computer's microphone. SmartMusic, I think, still has a much bigger library of concert repertoire, but this Noteflight thing was sort of just a competitor off in the distance until this recent announcement, because this service that they have just integrated with, which I will tell you the name of in just a minute here, apparently assesses intonation as well as pitch and rhythm. And I am very curious about the idea of me taking some of my sequential musical examples and importing them into Noteflight and then publishing them as musical assignments that a student could then play and be assessed on pitch, rhythm, and intonation. I'm really interested in that idea. I'm actually going to have the president of Noteflight and Hal Leonard's digital division come on the show in a couple weeks. But I just thought I would throw that out there. Like, if you had a tool that assessed intonation to your liking and could automate some of this stuff, would you be willing to give up some of that customization?
Most likely, if it gave the student a better result. We have the biggest problem we have with that is that almost all of these intonation, like SmartMusic does the same thing. It's all based on the equal tempered scale, and they set it at I think it's usually plus or minus 5 cents on either side of that to register as a correct sounding note. Actually, no, I think it's larger than that, because you have to have it has to be wide enough to fit minor or major thirds and things like that. So it might even be up to like 15 or 20 cents on either side for each note, which is a really, really wide range. We're trying to teach consonants, we're trying to teach audiation, we're trying to find that spot within 5 cents that they can hear that. And so if you're working with an equal tempered scale, then you can either set it tight enough that you only can find those notes, declare those notes in tune if they're in 5 cents the goal note. But then if you're talking about a major third, then it's marking perfectly in tune major thirds as being incorrect, because the major third has to be tighter to be in tune than an equal tempered note would be. And so it gets very confusing when you're talking about all the logistics of trying to grade intonation. But in the end, we're trying to teach very, very simple note relationships. We're trying to teach what it sounds like to play perfectly in tune at an octave or a fifth or a fourth or a third. And so we're trying to find that. We're finding that doesn't work all the time in those automated things. And that's where the human ear really is much, much, much better for that task at this point still.
The company is called SoundCheck, and the technology that is underlying their audio interpretation algorithm is called Match My Sound. So yeah, that looks like it's something that's going to be integrated with Noteflight Learn in the coming days.
FileMaker shows that you can have real-time pitch recognition and development based on key centers that are done in just intonation. Tonal Energy actually has that built into their analysis feature, where you can set the just intonation for the key of C, play a melody in the key of C, and it'll tell you how well you're playing in tune within that key. So the technology exists. I just haven't seen it in one of these platforms yet.
That's exactly my thing. It's like we were talking earlier about using Logic to pitch correct. I mean, Logic has an awareness of tuning systems, and I can highlight all of the notes of a flute player and center it into the key of B flat, and then I can do a little slider that controls how much from 0 to 100 do I want it to correct it along that B flat scale. So yeah, I mean, it's just like no one's combined it all yet.
Which means it's only a matter of time before they do.
Well, okay, cool. And I use that question also to sort of pivot towards, speaking of web-based stuff and automation. Claris, who makes FileMaker, has announced very recently FileMaker 19, which is coming with a whole bunch of new features, all of which seem to be about extensibility and automation. So, like they're and also cloud stuff. So they're gonna, first of all, you can pay them to host your database in their cloud. Now, I know that we're using a third-party provider, but the cost and the speed of the syncing are not always ideal for us.
Right.
I would imagine Claris probably could be more cost-effective and speed efficient in the cloud.
I've done a little bit of investigating, and the biggest problem with the Claris cloud is the pushing it out to students. They're sort of designed behind a user-based model, where if you are running a company and you have different levels of users, maybe you have salespeople that have to use this app but have to run it on FileMaker Go, or you have a couple of developers that are trying to push out all the apps, but you still have to have licenses for every single person that's using that software, and they're priced at a point where that person has to be making money for your company to make it make sense. It's not one of those things where you can push it out to a whole bunch of students and then just pay a lot of money for them to use. So I've been discouraged by that a bit. I'm more encouraged by platforms like Noteflight getting more features added, because honestly, I don't want to be doing all this programming on my own. I want to be able to be a teacher and use these tools in the way that I want to use them, and not have to worry about creating a lot of things from scratch. Not to say that I won't create things from scratch as long as they do a better job than what's out there. It allows me to reach more students. But eventually, I'd love to get to the point where I can find a company that does that, or create a company that does that, and be able to get what we need.
Yeah, I mean, the interest in automating or scripting anything is to try to solve some sort of problem, and I think we'll use what we can when it's the only thing available to us. But I mean, some of the other things that are in the Claris announcement are like JavaScripting and like Siri shortcuts. I mean, I'm a Siri shortcut guy.
Well, that's because Siri can understand your voice.
Siri, well, it's not. So Siri shortcuts are not just not just scripts that you create that run when you make a Siri command. They're also little mini applications you can build on your iPhone or your iPad. So like I've got, this was heavily featured in the last episode. I've got like a bedtime thing where sometimes I say out loud, lady in a can, it's bedtime, and then the thing runs. But what I do more often is I have a button that's like, because a shortcut can be installed as like an app icon on your home screen. Right. So I've got a button that like runs the shortcut. So I don't know, to be, just because of the nature of how cumbersome FileMaker can be to navigate sometimes, I'm kind of excited about, if we end up exploring this as an option, like I actually installed the new version of FileMaker on iPad. You can nominate, or sorry, the term is donate. You can donate any script from a FileMaker app that you've built as an action in Siri Shortcuts. So your end of the day email all the parents. Not that it's that hard to do when you're already sitting in front of your computer with FileMaker open, but like that could be something that you just create in a Siri shortcut, and you tap one button on your iPhone.
Or it's scheduled to happen at a certain time every day.
Exactly right. And so, and with automations in Siri shortcuts, I can set my bedtime shortcut to run at a certain time every day. I don't, because then my wife would kill me. But yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, cool. Well, that's FileMaker.
Yeah,
there's a lot.
There is a lot in there.
Totally a lot in there. Should we do? Have you been thinking about album and app of the week? Should we do those?
I've not been thinking about album and app of the week. I'll have to come back to that and circle back at a later time.
And by later time, does that mean like if I talk about mine for a few minutes, you'll be able to get through it?
Maybe. I have thought about it. Sorry.
That's fine. Actually, speaking of Siri shortcuts, I don't think I ran the one that automatically emails the guest all of the things that they are supposed to know about the episode, because I usually sit next to you every day. So right. I was like, I don't need to run this. To be honest, BS my way through this segment every week, because I'm like always thinking about like 8 new apps at every time. So there's always something I'm excited about enough that I think is worth talking about on air. Same usually goes for music. So I'll go ahead. I'll just say that I have been using an app this week that I've had installed on my devices for a long time, but haven't really seen a use for. It is called Discord, and it's actually a chat app designed for gamers to like discuss. Honestly, like I don't even. It's one of these many online tools for gamers that has been reappropriated for a more general use. Like Twitch is a video game streaming service, but now everyone just streams live stuff on Twitch. From musicians all the way to, whatever you might imagine. So Discord is something that I've, out of curiosity, had installed on my devices, but I recently started actually subscribing to there's a network of podcasts called Relay FM who produce a bunch of really good technology shows, and I wanted to support them, so I am like doing like a support tier for one of their shows. And one of the many benefits of that is you get a couple of special podcasts from them that are on a special RSS feed, one of which is about producing podcasts, so I thought it would be relevant to me. But then you also get invited to a Discord channel, which is, we use Slack to chat with our music team, and that's been mentioned on this show recently. But Discord is a lot like Slack in that you have a server, and then within that server there are a bunch of different channels of discussion. And it's really cool to be in a group of other users who are like-minded in their interest in technology. There's like, it's the type of people who put a lot of attention to detail in things and like using their computers for the same kind of purposes that I do. So it's nice. It's like, and it's not just tech nerd stuff. Like I can ask, there's like a channel for food and drink, and I can ask them for grill. I'm researching grills right now. I can ask them about grills and get like a bunch of people chiming in. So anyway, Discord, it's one of those apps that's like not useful until you're in a community of people who use it, and then it all of a sudden becomes a great and useful app. It's like really well designed. It takes full advantage of all the Mac and iOS features that you would want it to. So I just had no reason to use it until now. So that's Discord.
Cool. Probably the only app that is sort of off the beaten track that I've been using a whole lot is a music streaming service called Adagio. That has a really nice user interface. Has a lot of classical music from a bunch of different performances that you can go through, and it's really helpful from a score study perspective, because you can look at 82 different performances of a piece and look at a performance history. You can really study how it's changed throughout the last 100 years, which is really cool to see how orchestras were treating a composer 100 years ago versus today, and see the development of modern performance practice as well, which is a great database. It's a paid music streaming service, but it's got a great interface for selecting things and a lot of metadata.
Yeah, it's really amazing. It's like it's setting out to solve the problem of classical music metadata. It does it pretty successfully, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. Also, I'm a happy subscriber of that. Have you heard of NKoda?
I have not investigated it at all.
So I've been trying it out lately. It is like the sheet music version of Adagio. It's a little bit broader. Like it's got everything from, like romantic works for symphony orchestra all the way to like, here's a guitar tab of a Radiohead song.
So the cross section of IMSLP and Scribd.
Yeah, maybe that's a good way of thinking of it. Yeah, I think it's like that, but it's like packaged into this nice $10 a month app. I'm a little bit baffled, but because like I kind of want it for this purpose of score study. Like I want to be in a private lesson and have a student say like, okay, like I'm auditioning for a local youth symphony and I've got to play like this Glock part from like, the planets. And it starts at measure 142. And then I'm like, okay, well, I want to find out what the orchestra's doing there. I don't own a physical copy of that score, but I have no idea like where in this audio recording we're referencing, like where measure 142 is. I need to like get some context. So it's one of these things where I go to NKoda, and hopefully if I can like see how all the different parts are aligning together, it's a little bit easier to narrow down not only like where in the recording do we need to be listening to, but like what other things are happening in context of the part I'm preparing the student for. But it's not like Adagio in that you can search anything for orchestra within the past 400 or so years and expect to get at least a recording of it. Like there's a whole lot of holes, and I'm not figuring out yet quite what the publishing deals are, that you know what I mean?
Right. Another great thing you can use for that that task is the New York Phil has an archive. If you go to the archive at New York Phil, they have scans of parts that were used in a lot of different performances for the last 50 years or so. So you can put in a title of a piece and it'll have a scan of the parts that were used. You can see markings, you can see bowings, you can see different things that people have written in throughout the years. But you can also find where an excerpt is from, and then you can go back to the score and see some conductor's notes as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I don't use that as much as I should. That's a good one. All right, well, I have been listening to, do you know Sarah Jarosz?
I do not know Sarah Jarosz.
So I've been listening to her new record. It's really good. She runs in the same crowd as Chris Thiele and like all of the progressive bluegrass people. She's got a modern bluegrass sound. Is a singer songwriter. The recording is like, I don't know. There's just like, I could say very few things about it or like talk about it for the next hour, but like she's just got a really, really astounding voice and just a clarity to the instrumental performances and to the recording technique that just like everything speaks with perfect tone and balance. It's just like a great way to carry oneself through lots of days kind of lounging around the house and working from home. I haven't like really listened to the words with a ton of detail yet, but we've been waiting. That's one of a couple of albums we've been waiting to drop for a while, and it finally came out, and it's really good. She's great. She's got a trio. She performs with a cello player sometimes, who is like kind of in the band as both the replacement of a fiddle player and a bassist, but at the same time. So like she'll be playing a fairly traditional mandolin or banjo accompaniment to herself, but then he'll be like doing like a pizzicato downbeat here and there, and then like filling in like the middle of the measure with like fiddle riffs and stuff, like in a way it sounds like it would be really angular and jarring, but it's not. It's like very fluid. It sounds like one line when he does it. It's just really cool.
That's cool. One of the things I've been listening to lately, Mark Ribot and the Prosthetic Cubans. It's a funny name, Mark Ribot y los Cubanos Postizos. It's a nod to a lot of Cuban music and a lot of stuff written by and for Arsenio Rodriguez. And he's got a whole crew of people playing with him. Let's see, there's Brad Jones of the Jazz Passengers. Let's see, John Medeski Martin Wood, drummer Robert Rodriguez of Miami Sound Machine. So a lot of cool players and just a cool Cuban sound. Great for beautiful nights on the deck.
That's awesome. You're gonna have to send me a link to that. I won't know how to spell that when I search for it.
Sounds good.
Yeah. All right. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this deep dive into a little bit of the musical philosophy that certainly, that we share, and that how it pertains to teaching at Ellicott Mills Middle School, and how Ben and I teach, and then all this fun tech surrounding the whole FileMaker and relational database topic. Hopefully that was helpful and interesting. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. You can find me on Twitter at Robby Burns. You can also find my blog and this podcast. My blog is at robbyburns.com. The podcast is at musicedtechtalk.com. Ben, are there any places that people can find you on the web?
Let's see, we have the Ellicott Mills website, imsmusic.org. We have our youth orchestra website for the Howard County Youth Orchestras, HOCOYO, HOCOYO.org. It has all of our county offerings that I spend a lot of time with. Not a lot of personal things that I'm doing outside of work right now, so those are the two spots.
Awesome. I'll link it all in the notes. And thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. Until next time. See you, everyone.